of days back, I talked a little bit about Nintendo's current financial situation, right? They did an investor report. They talked about how huge of a success Zelda, Mario, Pokemon, and Pikmin 4 have been, right? Last year was phenomenal for Nintendo. Even though the gaming media industry is beginning to ramp up the anti-Nintendo propaganda. That has become very apparent after last year's Game Awards, in which like all of these great games were shafted for things that nobody has ever heard of or played. Right? That was what we saw last year. And although that's been continuing this year with people downplaying the arrival of great games like Another Code R, Mario versus Donkey Kong, Princess Peach Showtime, Unicorn Overlord, like going into 2024 has been interesting because so many people have been adamant that the Switch is on the way out. Like it's gonna be replaced by the summer. It's gonna be replaced by the fall. It's gonna be out by the Switch 2 is gonna be out by September. It's gonna be out by the end of the holiday season. That at this stage is obviously not gonna happen, right? If the Switch 2 launches this year, it's gonna be like mid-November. Okay, like it's gonna be a holiday thing. And it doesn't seem that's in the cards because Nintendo has specifically stated several times that they intend on supporting the Switch until March 2025. So really, there was no real indication that the Switch was going to get replaced. There was no real signs of it. You know, software releases weren't slowing down. They were still focusing on Switch. But you're constantly seeing people come out and make these weird declarations that like, oh, they're dancing around the issue. They're gonna put it out there in the next couple of months, right? It's gonna come out of nowhere and it's gonna blow everyone away, right? The Switch is old, right? It needs to be replaced. Like that is the mindset that a lot of these people are in, right? You know, you see Review Tech USA do it, you see RGT85 do it, you see Arlo doing it, right? It's basically every major Nintendo YouTuber coming out and like declaring the Switch is dead, right? And they've been doing this for a long time, but you know, when you actually look at what's happening, when you see Tears of the Kingdom sell 20 million units, when you see Pokemon, you know, break new records, when you see Pikmin 4 sell the best it's ever been, when you see like Super Mario Bros. Wonder doing as well as it did, in spite of the entire internet screaming about how they didn't know it was coming out and how it wasn't going to be a big deal and how nobody cared, like that game has like sold 11 million units, right? Like people don't realize how insane that is for a 2D platformer, right? They just want to create this narrative that like nobody plays 2D platformers, nobody cares about them. But meanwhile, the game right now is at the top of the Switch eShop charts. And people will seriously try to tell you that like, oh, that doesn't matter, right? Because Fortnite makes more money. Like these guys don't understand like what's happening here is that Nintendo is essentially choking out the rest of the industry by providing stellar entries in a lot of different genres. You know, they have the 2D platformers, they have the open world adventure games, they have the narratively driven visual novel thing that Another Code R is. You know, you have like you know, puzzle platformers like Mario vs. DK. You know, you have whatever Princess Peach Showtime is going to be. Like you have all this stuff, and yet you're every single time you're seeing these people sit here like going like, oh, that doesn't matter. Oh, that can't compete with Baldur's Gate 3 or whatever. Like the Baldur's Gate 3 thing is interesting because you know, throughout all of 2024, 2023, right, we were told that, like, oh, Baldur's Gate 3 is so good it embarrasses the entire gaming industry, especially Zelda, right? It's the game of the year, right? We were told that, like, over and over and over again about Baldur's Gate 3, but then, like, you know, when you look at just how much more relevant Zelda, Hogwarts Legacy, you know, Mario Wonder, you know, all these games have been, right, you really start to see that, like, Baldur's Gate 3 didn't leave much of an impact at all. And even if it was some big giga like ultra hit, you know, selling, you know, as much as people said it was, like 34 million units, you know, even if it did sell that much, that wouldn't have limited Nintendo's success at all, right? Like you're seeing them doing this with Power World too, where like Power World exists and people are like, "Oh, the Pokemon company is embarrassed. Game Freak is going to go out of business because of this thing." When there's no Pokemon game coming out on the same time, right? There is no comparison. Like the audiences are different. Like it couldn't be more obvious that like the Power World demographic is not the Pokemon demographic, right? There isn't any real overlap with those games at all, other than the fact that Power World plagiarized Pokemon designs, right? Like, there's no real overlap between the audiences. Like, the worst that's going to happen is that, like, they're going to compete for a bit, right? Until Pokemon wins out, like, like it always does. Like, that was the worst case scenario, really. That, like, oh, the Pokemon Company might have to compete. But that didn't happen. Power World fell off a cliff, just like Baldur's Gate 3, right? Like, that is the mindset that these people are in. Like, we keep seeing this over and over again, where they act like every minor thing on other platforms, whether it's like Ace Combat 7 or Tekken 8 or Starfield or Final Fantasy 16 or Hi-Fi Rush or Forspoken. Like, they always act like these minor things on other platforms are like these unstoppable things that, like, Nintendo will not be able to deal with, that they will not be able to overcome. Like, everybody's just gonna go to other platforms because, like, oh, it has Tekken 8. But, like, reality in reality, like, the worst that's gonna happen is that, like, people are gonna own both an alternative platform and a Switch, right? Like, that's the worst case scenario, because Nintendo has too many good games to ignore anymore, right? Whenever I see someone, like, seriously try and come out and say that, like, Nintendo does not produce any games I'm interested in, like, I just throw my head back and laugh, like, uproariously. Like, it's that scene in George of the Jungle where you have those three guys like, it's time to throw our heads back and laugh. Ready? Like, it's exactly like that. Because, like, you cannot seriously tell me with a straight face that Nintendo does not produce any games at all that you're interested in. Like, I straight up do not trust people who say that at this point, because to me that just indicates you don't know anything about the company, right? You can kind of see this with, like, that video those guys made, like, covering my top 10 favorite games ever list, which weren't all comprised of Nintendo games, by the way. But, like, you could see these guys, like, reacting to this list, like, oh, I never played that, never even heard of it, like, over and over and over again for, like, basically all 10 entries on that list, right? Like, they did that incessantly. And, like, these were games, like, across a wide variety of genres. They're all well regarded in their own right. They're all fairly popular. And yet, like, you have these average steampunks, like these stereotypical PC gamers, like, coming out and saying, "Oh, I've never played that. I never even heard of it." And that's the mindset that a lot of these people are in, right? Is that they don't actually know what's on Nintendo platforms. The stereotype that, like, oh, people only buy Nintendo games for Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon, that hasn't been true ever, right? In the N64 era, they were getting it for GoldenEye, right? They were getting it for Turok. They were getting it for, DK64 and Banjo Kazooie, like, all these things that, like, people like to pretend weren't all that spectacular, right? But in reality, we're, like, generation defining classics and masterpieces, right? Like, that has been the narrative that the gaming journalism industry has been trying to push, is that, like, outside of a scant few, like, major Nintendo exclusives, Nintendo doesn't have a whole lot of going for it. But in reality, like, it's by far the best company in the industry, right? With affordable hardware, with a wide range of titles, with great unique features, like, appealing to all demographics, right? Like, there is nothing better than a Switch in this regard. And I do think this is the problem with PC gaming, is that, like, people just default to playing one or two old games on their gaming PC, and they're just like, oh, PC gaming is so much better. I can play Age of Empires 2 whenever I want, without really, like, stopping to consider that, wait a minute, that new games are coming out on Nintendo Switch, like, all the time, like, every week. Like, I haven't bought a new game in 10 years. Nintendo is putting out new games now. Like, again, you see this all the time whenever Nintendo releases a new Pokemon game or a new, like, Zelda game or whatever. Like, these people are just baffled by it. Like, this is still going on? I had no idea, right? Eh, I do think that is, like, the important thing to note about, like, the normies, right? The casuals, the plebs, the pretendos, whatever you want to call them. Like, these 30-year-old boomers who don't play a lot of games but want to tell you what is and isn't popular, right? They don't know what's coming out, right? They don't know what's available on other platforms. They don't know a lot about, like, genres outside of their wheelhouse. They don't know, like, what people are actually playing on Nintendo Switch. They don't understand how popular this stuff actually is, right? I think Pokemon and Zelda are like both really good indications of that. Both of those games outperformed Baldur's Gate 3, but you won't see anybody really talk about that at all or address why, right? You'll see them try to pretend Power World is more popular than Pokemon, even though it's not, but like they won't actually talk about the Nintendo brands itself because they don't know anything about them. They don't care to know, right? Like they really do think Nintendo is on the verge of becoming irrelevant, and that really could not be further from the truth at this stage, right? Nintendo is dominating right now, and I just don't see the vast majority of the audience really acknowledging that.